the story opens in deliberate quiet. A single truck moves along a secondary road, far from front lines and headlines, carrying 5 men whose names rarely appear in records. There is no urgency in their movement, no visible combat, no chaos, only routine motion that feels administrative rather than military. The absence of insignia, witnesses, and documentation becomes the central tension. This is warfare stripped of spectacle, where violence travels disguised as logistics. The viewer is drawn in not by what is shown, but by what is missing, primed to sense that this unremarkable vehicle is part of something far larger and far darker than its appearance suggests. After the unease of the opening image, the narrative carefully widens its lens. The viewer is oriented not to a battlefield, but to the vast spaces behind it. Occupied roads, administrative zones, and transitional territories where war functioned without spectacle. This section explains how modern warfare depended on mobility, decentralization, and small units operating with broad mandates and minimal supervision. Trucks like this one were common, expected, and rarely questioned, blending seamlessly into the background noise of occupation. By framing the environment as one where violence often arrived disguised as routine transport, the story reframes the truck column as neither exceptional nor accidental, but as a logical product of how the war was organized and administered. This section narrows fully onto the 5 men themselves, not as characters with invented inner lives, but as administrative and military types reconstructed through patterns found across comparable units. Their ranks are likely modest, their authority situational rather than absolute, derived less from ideology than from paperwork, orders, and the implicit permission of the system around them. The narrative emphasizes how little distinguishes them from thousands of others: average ages, unremarkable service records, interchangeable roles. Yet within the confined space of the truck, these ordinary men collectively possess the power to decide life, death, and disappearance. The tension emerges from this imbalance: how a small group, armed more with procedure than weapons, could exert irreversible control while remaining historically anonymous. The narrative now follows the truck as an instrument rather than an object, emphasizing movement as a form of power. Routes are chosen for convenience and discretion: secondary roads, off-hours travel, predictable rhythms that avoid attention. The 5 men operate within a system that rewards efficiency over scrutiny. Fuel requisitioned, destinations logged vaguely or not at all, tasks framed as routine transfers or security measures. Nothing about the column's movement appears irregular, and that normalcy becomes the source of tension. The section avoids depicting acts directly, instead showing how violence is folded into schedules, checklists, and transit times. By focusing on process rather than outcome, the story illustrates how mass harm could be executed smoothly, repeatedly, and with almost no friction, leaving behind movement, not memory. As the truck continues its work, the narrative shifts away from those inside it and toward those who briefly intersect with it: civilians who watch it pass, clerks who stamp documents, soldiers who wave it through checkpoints. This section explores how most participants in such systems were neither perpetrators nor resistors, but facilitators through inaction. Silence is treated not as absence, but as a functional component of the operation, allowing ambiguity to protect everyone involved. The story resists moral simplification, showing how fear, routine, self-preservation, and normalization blurred ethical boundaries. By widening responsibility without diluting it, the section confronts the viewer with an unsettling reality. The truck's power depended less on cruelty than on compliance quietly distributed across an entire environment. This section approaches the core action of the column indirectly, through gaps rather than scenes. Surviving documents, if they exist at all, speak in euphemisms, incomplete entries, or retrospective testimony shaped by fear and self-protection. The narrative emphasizes what cannot be confirmed alongside what can be inferred, allowing uncertainty to generate tension instead of weakening it. Violence is never described in sensory terms. Instead, it is framed as an administrative outcome. People removed, locations cleared, numbers adjusted. The absence of explicit detail becomes the point, illustrating how the system was designed to erase immediacy and responsibility simultaneously. This restraint forces the viewer to confront a deeper discomfort, that the most consequential acts of the war were often executed in ways that left history with paperwork instead of witnesses, and silence instead of images. Once the truck's task is complete, the narrative follows not consequences, but diffusion. The 5 men do not vanish dramatically. They are reassigned, absorbed into other units, or return to civilian life carrying no visible markers of what they participated in. This section examines how post-war documentation, trials, and investigations struggled to isolate responsibility for acts carried out by small, mobile groups operating under vague authority. Records are incomplete, testimonies contradictory, and accountability fragmented. The story highlights how bureaucratic systems that enabled the crimes also shielded their perpetrators afterward, converting actions into files and files into footnotes. Rather than offering closure, the section underscores a historical pattern. For many victims, there was no reckoning, only administrative forgetting that allowed ordinary lives to resume uninterrupted. The conclusion returns to the image of the truck, now stripped of immediacy and reduced to historical residue. This section reflects on how episodes like this resist traditional remembrance because they lack spectacle, heroes, or clear villains, yet they reveal the true mechanics of mass violence. The 5 men are not presented as monsters or anomalies, but as functionaries whose actions expose how modern war decentralizes responsibility until it becomes almost invisible. The viewer is left with an unresolved tension. If history's greatest crimes were committed quietly, by ordinary people operating within accepted systems, then memory itself becomes fragile and contingent. The section ends by suggesting that what endures is not the truck or the men, but the question they leave behind. How many similar columns moved unseen, and how much of the war remains buried in silence rather than record?